call this meeting of the Jacksonville City Council to order. I want to welcome everyone who's viewing the meeting on G10 television this evening. We'll begin by having the Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilmember Randy Thomas, followed by the invocation by John Carter.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our Heavenly Father, we come to you again, giving thanks. Giving thanks for this beautiful day and all your blessings that you so graciously bestow upon us, individually and as the city of Jacksonville. We give thanks that we had the privilege to vote. And now we give thanks for those who have been elected, and we pray for them. From the president all the way down to our local elected officials, we pray that they may have guidance, direction, may exercise leadership, and find ways to come together to serve the common good. Again, we are in this pandemic of COVID-19. We pray for all those who are affected, either physically, financially, or otherwise. And we continue to pray for healing. Healing that this soon will pass, but that until it does, that we will all try to exercise the safety measures that are given to us by the medical community to protect not only ourselves, but our families, our friends, to protect each other. We pray for our military who is serving here and around the world, many of them in unsafe and dangerous places. Keep them safe and bless their anxious families. And as always, give guidance to our mayor and to our council. For all this we ask in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Be seated. Everyone has had the opportunity to review the agenda for tonight's meeting. I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Next, we have public comment, and I'll trade you that for this. We have one person signed up, Joe Breda from 700 Royce Avenue. Did I say his name right?
Rhoda.
Broda, that's
Rhoda.
right.
Oh, Joe Rhoda.
Yeah, that's what I was confused when I saw that. It looked like an E instead of an O. Mr. Broda, if you will, please state your name and address for the clerk.
My name is Joseph Broda. I live at 700 Royce Ave, Jacksonville, North Carolina. I'm here tonight, and thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for hearing me tonight. But we were supposed to be having another meeting 2 weeks ago here tonight about voting on food trucks being allowed to operate inside the city limits of Jacksonville. That was canceled for more research. I can tell you I pay county taxes, state taxes, federal taxes. I pay property taxes. I have a building inside the city limits of Jacksonville that I rent from. I pay money to them. They pay property taxes. And I'm still not allowed to serve and operate inside the city limits. To me, that is discrimination against my business field, which is a restaurant. Just happens to be mobile. And I would like to really try and get this changed. We've tried now for almost 8 months with nothing but just dragging feet on this issue. I think just a month ago was probably one of the first times a lot of you even heard about it. But that's all I have right now.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you guys for your time.
Right. And I will check on, I know the staff was supposed to be putting together, gathering some information on this to be able to present to the council for us to make some type of judgment on what to do as far as the food trucks are concerned. But thank you again for coming.
Thank you. Thank you guys.
So we have the adoption of the minutes and some consent items. I think there's 12 consent items on here. I'd entertain a motion. The minutes are from the October 20th, 2020 regular meeting.
Move approval.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. The first item up tonight here is the auditor's report on the city's comprehensive annual financial report for FY 2020. And I think Gail's going to be with us, and we're going to be virtual.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. With us tonight, we have April Adams from Cherry Becker, and I think you might remember her from last year. She gave our presentation last year on the audit. This will be the second year they performed the audit, and she's going to be joining us virtually. So I'm going to turn it over to April.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I can hear myself, so I know you can hear me. All right, so good afternoon. I am happy to be here to be able to present virtually the audit report. Despite all the things that 2020 has brought us, we were able to overcome that and conduct a remote audit of the city. So that's what I want to present to you tonight, the results of that audit. So if we will go to the agenda slide. What I'd like to cover with you tonight is the role of the external auditor as well as the audit results. Along with that, I just want to give you a high-level review of what we do when it comes to internal controls, identify the significant audit areas, the single audit major programs that we audited. I want to do some very high-level financial results that come out of your financial statements, and then I'll do a quick summary, and then I'll be glad to take any questions or comments. All right, let's go to slide 3. Here we go. All right, so the role of the external auditor. We do perform your audit in accordance with 2 sets of auditing standards. The first one is just the generally accepted auditing standards of the United States. So any entity in the United States that gets an audit gets it done in accordance with those standards. And then we add the second set of auditing standards, which are the government auditing standards as you are a government entity. What those audit standards require us to do is to plan and perform procedures to obtain reasonable assurance that your financial statements are free from material misstatement. And I bring that point to your attention to let you know that we are performing procedures looking for that specifically, which may mean that we didn't test every single transaction that happened throughout the year. Because you guys receive federal and state grant money, we do perform some audits over compliance as well, in accordance with those grants. Once we've performed all those procedures, we are required under the standards to present you express some audit opinions. Because we do it under 2 sets of auditing standards, we got 2 separate audit opinions, and because you get both federal and state grant money, and we performed procedures over that for the single audit, we issue 2 separate compliance opinions for that. So there's 4 total opinions within your financial statements. And then finally, the audit standards require us to communicate certain things to you that may have occurred throughout the year or as a result of the audit. And we do that in 2 ways. One is a presentation tonight or this afternoon, and then we also issue a letter that accompanies your financial statements. The types of things that we would communicate to you is if there were any significant changes in your accounting policies. We identify what the significant estimates are in your financial statements. And then finally, if there was any journal entries identified as a result of the audit, we would identify those in that letter and in this presentation. All right, let's move to the next slide. So for internal controls, while we don't express an opinion on internal controls, we are required to perform certain procedures related to internal controls during our audit. The first thing we do is identify what the significant transaction cycles are. So you can think of things like cash. How does cash come into the city? How is cash dispersed? Payroll tends to be a significant transaction cycle, as well as the financial close process to get your actual financial statements themselves. So what we do is we obtain an understanding of each of those transaction cycles, and then we do a walkthrough, which is a test of one, to ensure that what you say you're doing is the typical procedure that's being of how the transaction flows. And then we make a determination whether we want to test for effectiveness on those. So we would pick a sample of the transactions under that transaction cycle and test for effectiveness. We do that on a rotational basis, and so we've tested those in the current year on a rotational basis, a 3-year rotation. The audit standards also require us to do certain things for journal entries. So we obtain all the journal entries that get entered and posted throughout the year, and we mine that set of journal entries for unusual transactions, and then we'll pull those transactions and look for business purpose or proper approval, proper accounts, etc. We're also required to do certain things for information technology controls. These are very high level. We're looking for access, security access to the system, changing of passwords, those types of things. And so we do that for a questionnaire, and we're looking at the general computer controls. And then finally, related to single audit, we're required to actually test controls over the single audit programs that we determine to be major. And so we're looking at the monitoring reports from the agencies that come and monitor throughout the year, as well as actually testing controls within those programs on the compliance requirements that are applicable to each grant. All right, we'll move to the next slide. So the significant audit areas, as I mentioned, we do a risk-based audit, which means that we are identifying what we determine to be the significant audit areas and the areas that are most susceptible to that material misstatement that we're looking for. And so what we end up doing is spending the majority of our time related to the audit in these audit areas, testing them substantively, which means that we're either testing them by confirmation with a third party. We are looking at them and testing them analytically based on outside information. And then finally, we would be doing a test of details where we're pulling individual transactions and looking at the supporting data. And then we still test lots of other areas. These are just the significant audit areas. All right, and then the next slide. These are identifying where we spend the rest of our time is auditing single audit, auditing the major programs related to federal and state grants. In the current year, we identified the federal transit cluster to be a major program, and then we identified the POW bill, which is also known as the street funds, were to repair streets as a state major program. And so we're looking at all the compliance requirements for each of those funds. To, like, you know, are the cost allowable and the activities allowable? Did you file the reports that are required related to those? If there was a match, was the match made, etc. All right, so the audit results, what everyone's really wanting to know about. So we did issue, as I mentioned, 4 different audit opinions. I am happy to report that all opinions are unmodified opinions. I know that doesn't sound that great, but that is the opinion that you want. It's also known as a clean opinion. It is the highest level of assurance that we can give you that your financial statements are free from those material misstatements that we were looking for, and that the programs that we audited as major programs related to the federal and state dollars were done in compliance with their compliance requirements. I'm also happy to report that during our review of internal controls that we did not identify any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, which means that that you don't have any control, like you have proper policies and procedures in place for internal controls. And then finally, those required communications that I mentioned come in a letter, as well as this presentation. In that letter, there's no significant accounting policies, changes in those policies identified in the current year. The estimates that are identified in that letter are related to your allowance for doubtful accounts, for your accounts receivable, depreciation based on the lives, the useful lives of those capital assets that the city owns, your estimates for your pension and your post-employment benefits are also another examples of estimates within your financial statements. And then finally, in the letter, I'm happy to report that we did not identify any journal entries as a result of the audit. And what that means to you is that the books and records that the team gave us to audit are what was used as a basis to create your financial statement. So all the transactions are getting properly captured in those journal entries and put in for the financial report. All right, so that's the best results I think you can get. Now to move on to just the high-level financial results I wanted to cover from your financial statements. The first one's just going to talk about the general fund and the budget to actual results. So in the final budget for the city, the board has appropriated the use of approximately $3.4 million during fiscal year 2020. And the results are that the city, actually the revenues beat the budget by about $1 million, mainly that's in the sales tax category. And then your expenditures were under by about $1 million. And so what that resulted in is that you actually added back to your fund balance rather than using it during the year for about $3.2 million. So it's about a $6 million swing from what you expected to how you ended up for the year. All right, so the next slide is the general fund balance. You guys do have a policy to maintain at least 10% of the expenditures for next year's budget as unrestricted in fund balance. And so the ending results for 2020 was that your unrestricted fund balance was about $26.7 million. And so that equated almost 50% of the budgeted general funds for the next year. And so then I've just showed you that it's just declines, just a little bit from the year before, just so you can have reference of how impactful year to year is. Okay, and then on the next slide, we're just going to take a look at your proprietary revenue funds. There's not a big story to tell here. What I've shown you is the revenues and expenditures for each fund: water, sewer, solid waste, and stormwater. And you can see from year to year the comparisons of revenues and expenses. And one of the things to check for here is that your revenues are covering your expenses for each of those funds, which is important for that to occur in a proprietary fund. Year to year, that means you're charging rates to cover what you've got going on. All right, and then this is just a little slide about your capital assets. The city's total capital assets are $186.63 million, and your capital assets actually did decrease despite a couple of these additions that I've mentioned here going around the circle, but it's offset by your depreciation. So just depends on year to year what you're adding to your capital assets in your plan. And then finally, this next slide is just showing you the long-term debt. So you'll see that total debt for the city is $76.32 million. And this shows you the breakout of the types of debt that you have: bonds, installment notes, and just loans. Those are state revolving loans. And then so the current year you issued $2.9 million in new debt. That's basically for some rolling stock new vehicles. And in the current year you paid down $9.7 million of your debt in principal payments. All right, so in summary, the city received clean opinions, no journal entries identified during the audit. There are good internal controls in place, no significant deficiencies identified for internal controls, and we did receive full cooperation from management. It was an interesting year, being that we did the entire audit remotely, and we just appreciate them working with us to figure out how to achieve that so that we could issue a timely audit. And now I'll be glad to take any questions or comments.
Is it April?
Yes.
How many local governments and related entities does your firm audit on an annual basis?
The firm?
Yes.
I don't know the exact number. It's at least 150.
Okay, and of those, how many have you found with significant problems or deficiencies?
Not too many of the ones that we audit. Typically when you are assessing whether you're going to take on a new client or not. You're assessing their ability to produce financial statements and whether they may or may not have those issues. So not a whole lot.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Woodruff.
April, I asked you this question last year, and it's important. Obviously, the auditors do not work for the management. They work for the mayor and council. At any time during this, did I, Gail Maids, or any member of the city staff try to influence you in any way in your determinations that are reflected in this audit?
No, sir.
Council, thank you for that report, Ms. Adams. Anybody else question? You're being asked to accept the audit report for this fiscal year of 2020. Do they need to?
Move to accept the auditor's report for the fiscal year in question.
Second.
Any further discussion? I think it's an excellent audit. Sounds good. With all the financial gloom and doom that we were faced with this awful COVID plague that we're dealing with, having to deal with, a lot of businesses, were suffering, but, sales tax is up. We didn't take the hit that we thought we were going to have. But I think it's an excellent audit. And she discussed the fact that we had $26.7 million in fund balance now with money being put back. And I know that you all are aware of the fact that we've been getting a lot of complaints about city streets. And we've discussed this topic before. And I think with that, I would like to see, because our staff worked really hard to cut expenses. We're talking about $5 million under expenditures. Did I hear that right? So a lot of that was due to gas, I guess fuel costs being down. But our manager and our staff does a great job as far as, cutting back on expenses. And that's why we have this really nice report here with this fund balance. I would ask the council to consider moving a sum of money from fund balance to go towards trying to bulk up the streets, because we've seen kind of our money as far as POW bill shrinking a little bit. And the roads are getting worse. And of course, you get the same complaints I get. And I think this would be a great opportunity. I still feel that the best way to have handled this would have been to get our local delegation to do the quarter-cent sales tax. That would have taken care of a lot of streets. But the fact of the matter remains, we need to do something. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to move. I would recommend a sum of $1 million would be a good number to go towards some of our street maintenance and try to catch up a little bit. I know we're not going to catch it all up, but, it would help quite a bit. Does that sound like something?
Do you want a motion?
We need to clear this.
We have to accept this first, right?
Let's do audit first. Well, we've already did our discussion, so all those in favor of accepting the audit, please reply in the affirmative.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Now we'll handle this deal I just thrown out to you about moving money out of fund balance. And this is for 1 year. This is a 1-year thing, not a recurring expense. Unless the council next year decides that, hey, we're doing well again, that maybe we should go a step further or put additional money in again. Anybody want to put that motion out there?
I will. I make a motion that we move $1 million from the unassigned fund balance over to streets for the purposes of paving at the, of course, the staff, the managers and staff's discretions.
I second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yes. I forget the figures that we were presented with in terms of the annual allocation and the scope of work that would be required to take some of our, Class C streets and put them into A or B category. our fund balance grew by what, 3 million?
3.24 million.
2?
The unassigned only grew.
I think we're being on the low side. I'd like to see $2 million put into a one-time, street paving rehabilitation program.
The unassigned only grew 1.6, if I'm reading the report correctly.
Is that right? Yeah,
Say that again?
you're right. You're right with that number.
No, revenues beat budget by $1 million.
Now, if you look at the unassigned fund balance, it only increased about 1.6 million from 2019. If I'm
That's correct.
correct.
The unassigned grew 1.6. The total grew 3.
The what grew 3?
The total,
The first part of your question there was about the prioritization of the streets, I believe you were asking about, Mr. Bittner.
No, I know we've had reports concerning that. I'm just questioning the amount of money and the scope of work that is out there for us to take to try to alleviate. And I'm thinking $2 million.
I don't think it's a question of need. I think we all agree we need it. I tend to be kind of fiscally conservative. I hate to spend two.
I think I'd like to see what the 1 million gets us at
Yeah,
first. and
before
then-
I spend
then
two,
it-
yeah.
You see what you get for one, and then if it's, we could go from there.
We could look at it again next year when the audit comes out. We don't necessarily have to do anything next year, but we can remember down the road and remember, that might be something you would consider.
It won't be long, we'll be talking budget again. I'd almost, I know this is a little bit of an offside, but I'd almost like to see us start dedicating a penny in addition to the POW bill. Even if we just start at half cent or a penny in the next budget, to see if possible, dedicate a penny of property tax to supplement the POW deal, not to supplant it, but to supplement it, to see if we could start getting a little better handle on the roads. One of the things that I've noticed that with our aging infrastructure, we're making a whole lot more road cuts than what we ever used to. I know that's putting a strain on the utility or the streets budget for repaving the utility cuts, but it just seems like every time I go down a road, we've got another utility cut somewhere along the way. So, but I'd like to see us try to start dedicating some monies each year in addition to the POW bill to help alleviate the problem.
Well, did you want to compromise and go halfway to his number, or?
No, I'm okay with $1 million right now. I think for the new budget, I'd like to see that as part of the discussion for next year.
Dr. Woodruff,
Mayor,
I know you had discussed something about reclassification of some of those streets. Will you be presenting that before us?
as part of the budget, we will certainly make a major effort. And as Mr. Warden stated, we're only about 3 months away from, the nice thing about Gail is she has great job security. With the audit finishing this past 2 weeks ago, she immediately started on the budget. You will be seeing a lot of budget detail in January and February on some of the tough issues that we think we need to address prior to getting into the real budget. Certainly street paving is one of them. What I recommend to you is that you proceed with the $1 million. When we put out the request for paving bids, we can also put in a category that would be in addition to what we think we can afford. And if the bids come in almost like a bid alternate, and if the bids come in, let's say for 5 more streets, and it's a reasonable price and we think we can afford it, we can then bring that back to you and you can determine, do you want to take more from your fund balance? But I do applaud you all for the fact that you are taking progressive steps to address the issue of street paving. Powell bill funds simply do not cover. That's what you have told the state legislature for the last 3-4 years. And this is at least a step in the right direction. This will literally double The $1 million will literally double the amount of money that we have for paving streets in the upcoming bid. So we will keep you posted, and if it's acceptable to you, we will send out the bids with an add alternate of additional streets, and then bring that back, and you can decide at that point, do you want to take additional funds out of the fund balance?
It's a good
I'm
compromise.
gonna ask you another question. I know part of the issue with the streets is also the infrastructure under the streets. So, you know, I think a lot of people don't understand the reason why you don't repave a whole street is a result of some of the issues that's going on with the infrastructure under it. I know right in front of my mother's house, they had to make a cut right there to get, you know, basically dug a hole to actually fix the pipes there. But I'm sure we're having that issue all over our various communities that are aged. So how are we gonna look at dealing with that? I know Wally had talked about sending cameras down different pipes and what have you, but
We can set up a workshop that explains that, but Mr. Jackson is correct. Before we pave any street, we do an analysis of the water and sewer lines that are under that street. None of us like to pave a road only to dig it up 3 months later. So that is part of the analysis. That's also one of the reasons why some streets take a lot longer, is because while the resurfacing of the street might cost, pick a number, $100,000, to do the subsurface work may cost $200,000 or $300,000. It is something, though, that I commend y'all for bringing up tonight and addressing.
And what you're talking about with a lot of the infrastructure underneath, though, kind of falls under our water and sewer fund. You know, there's also a fund balance there also.
Yes, sir. And remember, while the water and sewer fund pays for any water and sewer pipe improvements, the water and sewer fund cannot pay for the total resurfacing of the street. It can only pay for its portion of what you actually dug up. So if, for example, you dug a 4 foot wide trench on a 32 foot wide road, it can only pay for, 1/8 of that road. Did I do that math right?
I couldn't keep up.
It's
Okay.
close. It was close.
Close enough. Okay.
Okay.
I would also like to take just a moment, as April said, Gail and her staff are to be commended. I will tell you, there are two things in government that people absolutely need and demand, and that is safety and security in their community and financial accountability for the tax monies we all pay. And I am proud that we have an excellent public safety department of police and fire, and I'm extremely proud of the fact that we have a finance department that never, ever lets me buy a garbage truck or spend any money beyond what you have approved. So Gail, I personally thank you and commend you. Well done.
Very good. Pass that along to your folks, to your staff too. Y'all did a great job on getting this audit through. We had a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye on the audit. Opposed?
Well done.
Good job.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you very much. That was a good news tonight there.
Mayor and council, in keeping with the 10 rule, while the governor does not actually hold government to that, we do hold that to our standard. So over the next several agenda items, you will see staff members floating in and out. So John and I will now be stepping out. We will have members of the planning department take over these agenda items. Jeremy?
We'll go down to item 14 on the agenda for this meeting, and this is map amendment, rezoning from residential single family RSF7 to conditional corridor commercial. It's the two lots at 202 and 204 Sunset Road. And Jeremy Smith will be presenting this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the city council. Some of you, some of the board may be familiar with these properties. They were before the city council in 2014. They were discussed at length in the beginning of 2015. and it's back in front of you tonight, and I'm going to catch you up on why. These properties are located at 202 and 204 Sunset Road. Application for rezoning from residential single-family 7 to conditional corridor commercial has been submitted by CW Holdings LLC, represented by Mr. John L. Pierce. You'll notice a location on the vicinity map before you on the screen. This is aerial photography adjacent to the Moore Buick GMC and the intersection of Sunset Road and North Marine Boulevard. As stated before, the properties currently are zoned residential single family, as are the other properties within the Sunset Acres subdivision. Properties along North Marine Boulevard are zoned corridor commercial. The future camo land use plan would support this with a change or an update to the land use, and part of our recommendation of approval is for the city council to direct staff to update the land use plan at a future date. Currently, it is identified as LDR, these two lots. This is what the property would look like if it was rezoned to conditional corridor commercial. A brief history of the property, in 2014 and 2015, City Council heard this item on two occasions. It was withdrawn before it got in front of you again. A number of the neighborhood were concerned with encroaching commercial into the neighborhood, specifically noise, traffic. And so the applicant has now resubmitted a conditional rezoning that would not have any access onto Sunset Road, no noise devices, no speakers, limit lighting to a maximum of 15 feet high. And they are also proposing a large landscaping buffer along Sunset Road, and the type A buffer that borders directly to the residential, and also limiting the property specifically to auto sales only. The planning board heard this request at their October 12th meeting, and they, along with staff, are recommending approval that findings of fact A, C, and D are being found in the affirmative, and finding of fact B will make the rezoning consistent if staff is directed to update the CAMA. That the rezoning advances the public interest by creating more development opportunities. I, along with Mr. John Pierce, are available to answer any questions that the council may have.
I've got a question for Mr.
Yes.
Pierce. I just had looked over the neighborhood meeting minutes, John, and everybody seemed to be okay with the adjustments and changes.
Yes, sir. In fact, I'll give you kind of a summary of what we went over at the neighborhood meeting, if it's acceptable. I opened up the meeting and we discussed what the conditions were, and we had two placards up with the conditions, one showing the landscaping in detail, and one showing the conditions, no access from Sunset Road from lots 1 and 2, and no, be used for automotive sales and rental only, and the security lights, night lights would be a maximum of 15 feet high, and no amplified sound. And we also, the concerns were, and Mr. Plegman was with me, we showed them what the wall would look like. I asked them to produce a rendering of the landscaping in the wall, and they all seemed to like that pretty well. And the concerns Mr. Pfaffenfew said was who would maintain, and we told them it had to be maintained and monitored by the city, but it would have to be maintained by Mr. Williamson. The buffer would have to be maintained. And also there was concern about a light that shine, and that was fixed. And also concerned that there would be no test driving cars on the road. And since that time, Mr. Williams has agreed they don't allow them to test drive any cars through Sunset. And in fact, there will be no access completely on Sunset from these two particular lots. And after the meeting, and I discussed this, but after the meeting, I got a little concerned, so I got it okay by Mr. Williamson. And this is something I didn't even discuss, and I would like to introduce it into evidence. But I had a MIA appraiser to do an opinion of value and I may need to slide my mask on, and I want to introduce an evidence, and I brought an extra copy for each of you. But in summary, to make a long story short, Ms. Suzanne Nelson did an opinion of value, and she says, with the proposed regulations and guidelines that we proposed, it is, will not substantially insure or alter the value of the adjoining properties. In fact, she alluded on a personal note that she thought it would enhance it by the fact that right now, if you live in that neighborhood, you can look across and see the whole building, but with a 6-foot wall of landscaping, it'll cut that from public view or from the view of those houses. So I think that I'll pass that out if it's proper. I brought extra copies. Okay.
We've already passed it out, John.
Been passed?
Got a copy.
Okay. But, and I think the meeting went overall real well myself, and I think we tried to address every concern they had. And so if there's any more questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but I think I've basically summed it up, and Jeremy did a good job because we provided the minutes of the meetings to him. So if anybody's, any other council person or mayor have any other questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Yeah, it's just, you're gonna expand, are they hoping to expand the lot for sales and rentals of the?
Yes, sir.
Because it seemed like before it was just gonna be storage, back in 14, I can't remember that long.
Well, I mean, they'll be putting cars there.
Oh, okay.
That's the same use that we were gonna do before, except we've added some more conditions, but,
Right, okay.
and we'll access it internally from points of access from the existing operation.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions of Mr. Pierce while we have him up? Yes.
Mr. Pierce, did the neighbors at any time talk about the loudspeaker, the intercom systems during the operations of the day?
Those have been done away with. Amplified sound is done away with.
Okay,
And that's one of the conditions, no amplified sound.
okay.
Anybody else?
That was a major concern before. All right, thank you all.
Required public hearing in this matter, so I'll recess the regular council meeting. Is there anyone that wanted to speak who's present?
I wanted to add one point of clarity, because I know the question would come up that, as it develops in the future, they would have to submit a site plan because of the paving, and any development would be reviewed by the city staff and meet any city standards. So if you're asked by anyone, they will have to go through that site plan process. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll close the public hearing, reopen the council meeting, and Councilor, you've been asked to consider the proposed request.
Mr. Mayor, motion to grant the rezoning upon finding that the rezoning is reasonable considering one or more of the above findings of fact A to D being found in the affirmative, and that the rezoning advances the public interest.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, guys.
The next item, number 17, is a special use permit and type 3 site plan, air station mini storage phase 2, 1121 Old Maplehurst Road. And this is a quasi judicial hearing, so at this time I'll recess.
15? We skipped 15.
I'm sorry, did I skip one?
I think we did, yeah.
How did that happen?
We're still legislative.
Oh, I'm
Yep.
sorry.
15.
Getting ahead of myself here. All right, let's go back here. We're going to go to 15 now.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Tonight, we have a minor Unified Development Ordinance amendment for our downtown, basically our non-residential mixed-use zoning districts, our downtown districts. What staff has discovered is that we have certain sign standards that's applicable just to our downtown area. And we have commercial uses in the residential portions of downtown. So Right now, if you're a commercial business in the downtown business zone, you refer to the downtown business standards for signage, not our normal 5.12 sign standards. We want to make two changes to that. And then we also have recognized that because there's not any standards in the DTR section, you would have non-uniform standards for our downtown. So we want to take the changes that we're proposing, if they get adopted, and add them to our downtown residential portion as well. So to kind of sum that up, for our downtown, currently we require monument-style signs no taller than 8 feet. We are proposing to go to 10 feet, so add 2 feet of height allowed, and eliminate the monument requirement to any kind of sign, freestanding monument, it's up to the developer. And then bring the new standards and copy those over into the downtown residential zone as well, so that we have the same standards for all of downtown. And that's what staff is proposing tonight. I'll be happy to answer any questions that the mayor and council may have as it relates to these changes.
Council, any questions of Ryan? Okay, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
This time, we'll recess the regular council meeting, open the required public hearing in this matter. Carmen, anybody? Okay. Close the public hearing. Council, you're being asked to consider the development ordinance text amendment.
So I make the motion that the council approves the UDO text amendment found in the attachment A. This attachment is consistent with the 2007 Jacksonville Downtown Plan, which identifies the need to review and change the ordinance to permit appropriate urban pedestrian oriented signage. The amendment is reasonable and in the public interest, as it will make all of the downtown signage standard to uniformity.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify.
One quick.
Whoop, sorry.
When you start talking about how you could change, can you put that, the other slide back? When you're dealing with downtown residential district, I guess what I'm concerned about, what I just thought about is that, as we move forward, you're talking about if we change it, it'll affect whatever new construction that goes into downtown, correct?
Well, let's say, for example, you have an existing church that's in the downtown residential zone.
Right.
They would currently, if you don't pass this amendment, they would basically look at the current standards in Article 5, which is the same as what's on Western Boulevard, Henderson Drive, Gum Branch, which would look different than the downtown business zone. So we want it all to be the same for our downtown districts, both residential and our business. So we do allow some limited businesses in the downtown residential zone, so we wanted to make sure that the standards were uniform.
I guess I was concerned with some of the, older homes out there, if they would have to incur any cost as a result.
Homes, no, sir. If somebody wants to add a sign for a business that's in the downtown zone,
sign.
it'll be the same standards throughout, and by eliminating the monument requirement, it gives the different businesses another option that they don't currently have.
That's good.
And one thing, if I may, Mayor, we did send this information to the sign companies in case they wanted to provide any feedback, and we didn't get anything positive or negative, but I just want to let the council know we did reach out to, there's a grouping of signage companies that we met with recently, and we just used those same emails to let them know we were proposing this change.
Thank you, Brian. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Thank you. How in the world did that jump all the way there? Okay. Back to number 16. Okay. And this is the
They got a toggle.
special use permit and site, type 3 site plan, Gum Branch Crossing mini storage at 2461 Gum Branch Road. And Jeremy Smith will be doing this one, and do you swear that the evidence you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor, members of council. This is a special use permit and type 3 site plan for Gum Branch Crossing mini storage. Notice the aerial photography before you. This is located adjacent to the Lowe's Food Shopping Center on Gum Branch Road, near the intersection of Western Boulevard and Gum Branch. To give you a little bit better location, if you see the Dunkin' Donuts, and then across Gum Branch Road is the River of Life Church. This property is currently zoned corridor commercial, and within this zoning district, self-storage, mini storage is a special use permit. That's why it is before you tonight. Before you is the site plan, and these will be located behind a current under construction 22-unit shopping center that is adjacent on the driveway that's behind the Dunkin' Donuts going towards the Lowe's Food Shopping Center. This application was submitted by Lomel Inc. Representatives from Parker and Associates are here in attendance representing the applicant. The proposed 141,287 square foot self-storage facility is located on a 5.15 acre tract of land. At their August 10th, 2020 meeting, the Planning Advisory Board recommended approval along with staff of the special use permit and type 3 site plan based on findings of fact A through G being found in the affirmative, with the one condition listed under option 2, and that condition is that the site meet any requirements and recommendation of the currently drafted TIA. City staff, representatives from Parker Associates, and the owner are happy to answer any questions that the council may have tonight.
Question, Jeremy.
Yes, sir.
Show me how they get in and out of there to Gum Branch or to Western.
We'll back up to the aerial photography. There is currently a driveway on North Gum Branch. Once the highlight works for me. If you'll circle that driveway to the north of Gum Branch Crossing CC. Right. They'll enter in there. The Gum Branch Crossing CC is actually an area, it should be located on the same property here. It's on the other side of that driveway. But they'll access there, and then they also could access behind the Lowe's Food Shopping Center on Western Boulevard. Extension.
Was there a, impact study done?
That's what's taken this project so long to get in front of the council. If you'll notice, the planning board reviewed this back in August. And since that time, this project, along with several others in this area, have come together to work on a joint TIA because of several developments all occurring at the same time. But it is currently drafted, and we held it up until that was drafted so we could make the condition that it meet those requirements and recommendations.
What are some of the requirements there on?
Jason, do you want to maybe lead on that? He's asking what some of the recommendations on the TIA are. Thank you.
Since it's quasi judicial, I have to swear you in.
Yes, sir.
You swear the evidence you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, Jason. If you would state your name and.
Jason Houston, 306 New Bridge Street, Parker and Associates. Your question again was about the TIA?
About the TIA, what were the recommendations on the TIA?
For this phase, this is phase 1 of the TIA, and they're going to, what the recommendation was to monitor that intersection that he circled to see at what point it needs to be signalized.
What about, how about, turning lanes or anything like that?
As for this development, I don't believe there's any recommendation for any additional turn lanes.
Okay. Any questions of Mr. Houseman while we have him up here? Thank you.
I have a question of Jeremy.
Yes, sir.
Under the recommendation, the condition was that a TIA be performed. That's been performed, so.
We do have a draft,
So is there
copy.
still a condition that you need approved?
We want it, since it is in its draft state and it's not finalized, we want to condition it, because the site plan may need to be modified.
So you want to condition upon a final TIA?
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
That would be correct. Thank you for the clarity.
Anyone else wish to speak to this matter? It is a public hearing, and. Okay. All right. Council, any other questions? So I'm gonna close the public hearing in this matter. You're being asked to approve the site plan and special use permit.
Mayor Phillips, I'll make the motion to approve the special use permit and type 3 site plan based on the finding of facts A through G being found in the affirmative, provided the applicant adheres to the conditions found in option 2 under the recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries.
You're gonna have many storages in this.
I got one more.
17 of tonight's, we have another quasi judicial public hearing on a special use permit and type 3 site plan for air station mini storage, phase 2, 1121 Old Maplehurst Road. And this time I will recess the regular council meeting, open up the public hearing in this matter. You swear the evidence about to give us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, sir, I do.
Thank you.
I'm back.
That,
Nope. Agenda item 17 is another mini storage. However, this is over on Old Maplehurst Road. It's a special use permit for air station mini storage phase 2 submitted by Bailey and Associates. Mr. Chris Bailey is in attendance. They submitted a request for a 99,590 square foot self-service storage facility located adjacent to the Domino's Pizza on Old Maplehurst. And you'll notice the air station phase 1 to the southeast. So adjacent to the Plum Point Plaza Shopping Center. Currently, the project is zoned CC, as are the entirety of the corner of Wilmington Highway and Old Maplehurst. Properties across Old Maplehurst are zoned residential, multifamily, low density, There is an existing non-conforming mobile home park as well as a bar located across the road, and then the property to the west is zoned residential single family 20 and is currently undeveloped. For you on the screen is the site plan. There is also in the dashed smaller square on there, there's an existing cell tower on this site. But that is not impacting and it meets the required setbacks for cell towers. This property is adjacent to a future TIP project. However, we worked with DOT, and while the project as it is designed currently would not impact this site plan as developed, they will be granted an access on the future service road that will come out on Old Maplehurst at a new light. However, that project has been shifted down the road several years. The planning board reviewed this request at their November 9th, 2020 meeting, and they, along with staff, are recommending approval with findings of fact A through G being found in the affirmative, as the approval creates a value service to the community. Myself and Mr. Bailey are happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
council, any questions? Jeremy or Mr. Bailey?
I'm good.
At this time, I'll recess the regular the public hearing, excuse me. I assume there's no one present who wishes to speak out in the lobby. Okay. Councilor, you've been asked to consider the proposed request.
Move that the city council approve the special use permit and type 3 site plan based on the findings of facts A through G being found in the affirmative, with your approval creates a value service to the community.
Second.
I have a motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that's the end of our hearings tonight. So it's now 6:03, and I think we're going to take a short break and resume afterwards. So we'll stand recessed.
right, we're back.
Ready to proceed. Okay.
Mayor, good evening. On the items for discussion this evening, we'd like to ask Anthony to give you an update on the Jacksonville station. Many of you have noticed the progress there. And I would also like to ask Anthony to give you an update on the Federal Transit Administration FTA CARES Act, where we are on spending that money. Anthony, please.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. We're going to go through the Cliff Notes version of both of these presentations. As Dr. Woodger said, we're going to start with Jacksonville Station. And thank you for joining us earlier to look at some of the materials. We got some really good feedback, and we're going to continue moving forward. Project is going very well. We got utilities in place. Steel is on site, including the trusses. We've got under slab work going on to put in utility conduits. Walls are coming up. So right now, the project is progressing very well. To give you an idea of where we are financially, the grant for this project actually includes a total of $11.5 million. But given the fact that the bids came back so low, we were actually able to reduce the amount of money from that grant that we allocate to this project. So the 10.5 is what we're allocating from that grant to Jacksonville Station. And that specific number was set because this is how much money we can leverage with the value of the land. We've talked for a long time about how we're not having to put any cash into the construction, and that is going to continue to be true. Contingency is great, so very high in my opinion for this type of project, and especially where we are in the project. One of the things that we wanted to talk to you about is a potential add-on to the contract. When we selected this site, we talked many times about the issues with Thompson and the offset intersection. We'd really like to get your feedback on adding a concept like this to the existing contract. And I can toggle back. You can see that the intersection is offset. The trail has a mid-block crossing. This is what we would like for it to look like when it's all said and done. To do so, we would ask that we utilize some of the contingency that's available. We do not have to make this decision tonight. We would like to make it a little bit further along in the project when we know a little bit better what the exact cost is going to be, and that we're not having any huge impacts to the contingency. But at $500,000, that still leaves us with about $265,000 in contingency. Thus far, we've executed 2 change orders. First change order was for strengthening both sides of the building, which was for about, I think, $55,000, $57,000. The second change order is actually going to end up on Richard's desk probably later this week, and it's a total of $1,000. So I think financially, we're holding the line on where the bid came in. The contractor is doing an excellent job, and as this point, we're ahead of schedule. So I'll go back to the rendering here, or to the elementary school drawing, and any feedback that you have to offer. Is this worth the additional price that we would look to pay? Are you comfortable reserving some of that contingency if it's available for this improvement?
Now, exactly what would that $500,000 cover again, please, for the public?
So what it would cover, and I'll toggle back to where we are today. All right, the intersection is currently offset.
Right.
So that means both of the side streets do not face one another. What we would do is we would actually shift Thompson Street on our side, widen it a little bit to include 2 lanes onto Marine Boulevard. And in my opinion, I think the 2 most important things with this would be to install the pedestrian accommodations that are shown and also realign the trail. The reason that I feel this is very important, really twofold, mainly because this is a multimodal center and we want to emphasize multimodal transportation to and from. But also, all of us have observed the amount of foot traffic along this section of Marine Boulevard. This gives another opportunity for people to cross an intersection safely.
Now, will this be the only entrance in and out, or will the other entrance loop around and come out on Market Street and then Bell Fork Road?
You're talking about to the facility itself?
Yes.
Okay, so the entrance would actually be, well, let me start that again. The circulation for transit could be three things. One, they could go in and out of Thompson Street at the signal. That would be preferred. Second would be, just off the screen here on the right-hand side, we're going to build a right-in, right-out driveway onto Marine Boulevard. And then third, just like you mentioned, we could go out Market Street, Thompson Street to Market Street, and then connect to Bell Fork there.
Now, because the Market Street has the apartments,
Yes,
and I do
ma'am.
believe they are affiliated with Shallow, would you have to do a traffic impact analysis on that road for those commercial vehicles to go in and out? Or, because I'm thinking about the excess of traffic, that individuals might begin to use Market Street as another way of getting to the modal center versus actually going on 17, depending on
Sure.
which way you're traveling.
Sure. That was something that was evaluated when we did the NEPA process on this. Because it's federally funded, we have to look at all of those things. The traffic study didn't indicate a significant impact down there, but one of the things that we've identified is that the pavement condition is very, very poor. And so is the drainage in that area.
Have a lot of
And-
flooding.
And we've been working with the engineering division to come up with plans to hopefully fix that. So I don't think we would be putting a traffic signal at the end or anything like that, but we're definitely looking at resurfacing that roadway and actually strengthening it so that not only the buses, but also there's concrete trucks and garbage trucks and propane trucks that use that road so that they don't continue to deteriorate the road.
The reason I asked that question is because depending on what time of day, oftentimes you have traffic that becomes stagnant trying to make a left-hand turn off of Bell Fork Road onto Market Street going into Pickettown. And sometimes that traffic is backed up because everybody is behind that most inner lane when a person is trying to make a left-hand turn. And I just thought about the traffic congestions with those transportation vehicles trying to get in and out if they are using this as an access road.
Well, and I have to go back and look at it, but I think the DOT project at Bell Fork and Marine is making some improvements down that way to add turn lanes and storage. And I can't say that for certain, but I think there are going to be some improvements down there. I can certainly get back to you on that.
A couple of things to think about. If you look at the original contingency, you know, it was healthy. One of the reasons why we built such a large contingency was because of our concern with soil conditions on the site. And initially, we were concerned that we might have to undercut and refill as much as 4 or 5 feet of fill dirt. The contractor and engineering company came up with a very good solution, and that is they put in over 100 pilasters of, basically, you can see in this picture, but they jetted into the ground literally hundreds of yards of material, of rock. That eliminated the need for us to have to undercut and bring in fill material. That's been very, very successful. As Mr. Warden could probably speak a little better than I, on a project like this, your number one concern is getting the building out of the ground. It's the uncertainties. I would tell you that from my background, I'm very comfortable now that we're coming out of the ground, looking at the contingency fund and substantially reducing it. Because the rest of the things that could cause the contingency fund to be impacted are what I'm gonna call change orders from the client perspective. Now, what is that? That's where we decide to do a new material or to finish it differently. But once you come out of the ground, that contingency fund really is pretty sound. Mr. Warden, would you feel comfortable with that statement?
Sir, very much so.
Okay. The other thing to remember is the additional money that Anthony's talking about is actually not money that the city has put in. and it is not money that can be redirected to some other project. So for example, that $500,000 that he's talking about, it can't go to Jackham yet. It's specifically there to match the land that we have put in. So one of the values, for some time, we have talked about, even before this project began, the issues of the commercial trucks coming out at Thompson in that awkward alignment. So we see this as an opportunity not only to address the ability to correct this offset, but to avoid in the future using city tax money to have to do it. But that doesn't mean you should do it.
And really, I guess what we're looking for the council for the council tonight is just a yes or no on whether or not we should start talking to the contractor to get a price. The 500,000 is what our estimate is. The engineer's opinion of cost was lower than this, but we added some to it just as an additional contingency. So we would like the ability, if you support this, to go and talk to the contractor and get a price. And once we get that price, we can certainly make a final decision at that point.
Is the signal gonna be impacted at all if you change the?
Yes, sir, the signal will be impacted. So, because we're moving the alignment of the road, we're gonna have to move the alignment of the signal. The good news, if I can go back here to the drawing, the good news is we're not going to have to change anything on the north side of the road. You can see those yellow lines there, that's the right-of-way line. So if we were to change anything on the north side of the road, which is up here where it says realignment, that would be a very challenging thing to do. It'd be very expensive too. So all of our adjustments are going to be on the south side of the road, which is property that's owned by the city of Jacksonville or DOT right-of-way. Another way, depending on how the cost comes back from the contractor, one way that we could potentially reduce that $500,000 amount is if we choose to do some of the signal work ourselves. I think we've demonstrated through Plantation and other signal projects that we have the capability of doing signal construction. And that would potentially save us a good amount of money on that $500,000 if we choose to take that on. We would do that in-house.
Looking for approval?
Just direction.
Just direction.
Move forward.
Fine with me.
Very good?
Yes.
We're not making a final decision, we're just going to talk to the contractor. So timeline here, in November, we'll see steel coming out of the ground, exterior framing, continued into December with the roofing system going on and the tower going up. So over the next couple of months, this thing is gonna really start looking like a building. And the rendering below in that right-hand corner, that's what we looked at earlier today. That's what we think that's what we have planned the passenger waiting area to look like. Period 1940s train depot. Next steps. So we're anticipating completion of the project in summer of 21. In the next couple of months, as we move into budget, we will have to talk about how we're gonna fund operating and the personnel that we'll need to operate the facility. The good news is with the lease agreements that are listed there, the plan shows that we should be able to offset the general fund match requirement with the lease revenue. So essentially, we're hoping that going into the operation of this facility, the lease proceeds that we generate will provide enough local match for us to not have to add any to operate the building. And there is opportunity for expansion. Like I mentioned, the grant still has that $1 million in it that's for Jacksonville Station, okay? We cannot access that money right now because to get to it, we would either have to put in additional cash match or we would have to add more in-kind land value. One of the things that we're considering to use that $1 million on is an expansion of Jacksonville Station, which would look something like this. And just to point out, very important, that this is conceptual This is just the architect kind of putting our ideas on the paper. There's certainly no commitments to this point. But on the left-hand side is Thompson Street. Off of the screen to the left would be Jacksonville Station. The green line that you see there in hatch, that is the city's property line. So we own this property already. It was a residual of the rail right-of-way. What we would like to do here is to create more of a package style of operation for transit in this area by adding fueling capability and bus washing capability. We would also add some driver parking as well as some parking for our standby buses. Currently, all of this occurs at public services. And of course, there are some operational challenges associated with having people over here that run the system and then having all of our resources at public services, you know, in order to operate. So by doing this, I think that we would accomplish two things. You know, first, we would create those efficiencies by having these right next door. But second, we would also increase the city's capacity in fueling as well as with washing. So the fueling would basically be a mirror image of what we have over at public services. So this wouldn't be just limited to transit. We would have any city vehicle, any city vehicle would have the ability to come here and fuel. So it provides us additional storage capacity as well as disbursement capacity, which of course, you know, we're very conscious of, especially during hurricanes. And then the bus wash itself, right now the wash rack at public services is consumed 3 weeks out of the month by transit buses. So that leaves a very little amount of time for streets and utilities and so on and so forth. By having this bus wash here, we would essentially double the city's capacity there as well. So just like the item before, we're not necessarily looking for approval on this. We just really want some feedback as to whether this is something that makes sense. Is there value to this concept? And if so, we can continue the planning process moving forward.
And while you're thinking about that, once again, this part of the, let me do that differently. The land where this would go is not land that was included in the match value for the building.
Yes.
So this land would, once again, it would become your match. So saying it politely, you could build something like this without any city funds going into it.
Absolutely.
That's not a bad deal.
Absolutely.
Mr. Prince,
Yes, ma'am.
question. Is there additional, how many parking spaces is available to the public?
Here or at Jacksonville Station?
Here.
Jacksonville Station.
So this would not be available to the public. This
Okay.
would be limited just to
Okay.
city resources. The parking over here on that bottom left-hand side would be for our drivers. So that they could park over here and then they could go over here where we have the bus parking to go on route, to fuel and wash and go on route. On the opposite side, I think we have 60 or 80 parking spaces adjacent to the building for both staff and the public. So we feel really good about what we have over there, especially if we're able to add driver parking over here so that they're not right next to the building.
We've talked about providing some other fueling station away from the public services area, just so that people don't running all the way across town just to get gas, and then have to come back to whatever they're doing, so.
Well, one of the challenges is that this is pretty close to public services, but
Yes.
I would argue that it's also very central to the city, and that's one of the main reasons that we put Jacksonville Station here. It's much more accessible, I would think.
One of the other things to also remember is this is a very high piece of property. And while we have been very fortunate, even in Florence, now I was not here with some of the severe storms that y'all experienced. But as you know, to get into the Public Works Complex, you go down across a wetland area. So this would be a very good location. The other thing to remember is that you have hardened both sides of Jacksonville Station, so it becomes the hurricane staging place for your city employees who are going to be out. And by having a fueling facility right adjacent, there's just a lot of benefits. Anyone opposed to us pursuing this? You're not approving it, or you're not giving us approval to do anything other than further research.
Good thinking.
Okay. This is an excellent way for us to leverage the rest of that $1 million, because if we don't use it for something associated with Jacksonville Station, we have to give it back to the federal government. Can't be used for any other purpose. Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll just go to the next one. All right, thank you, sir. So several months ago, we talked about the CARES money that was awarded to Jacksonville Transit with the, I guess, the stimulus package. I don't know if that's what they called it or not. But we talked about it in May, and we identified a number of projects that we wanted to accomplish with that funding. Just very quickly, it was $2 trillion total nationwide, 25 for public transportation, and our slice of the pie was 4.23 million. So that's the budget that we're currently working with. There is no local match for this funding, so it's 100% federal, and it can be used for any transit purpose. So unlike most other CARES programs, we're not limited to just PPE and leave time and things of that nature. This can be used for any transit purpose. As long as it happens after January 20 of this year, and while there is no expiration date, our goal is to expend the funds within 2 years, because unused money that sits around for too long is subject to rescission. So we want to invest it within the community before Congress decides that they want to use it for other purposes. Here are the items that were approved on the spending plan. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but we'll provide an update on several of them. And of course, if you have any questions, please stop me. Fare free has been in place. This is part of our operations and maintenance cost for the grant. So it's been in place since April, and it's been very, very well received. I think the leadership that the mayor and council have demonstrated in allowing free fare has really been appreciated by our passengers. One thing to point out too is that all the data that we get back indicates that a majority of our passengers use transit to go to work. So we're not talking about joyriders. These are people that need this type of transportation to be productive in life. So ridership numbers are pretty impressive. You look at 19 versus 20, almost 6,000 rider increase in just a year. Wow. But I also want to emphasize that we've done this in a safe and a smart way. When coronavirus showed up, a lot of people started running for the hills, particularly transit systems. They reacted by shutting down completely. We didn't do that. We paid attention to what was going on, and we did things that were safe and reasonable along the way so that we could still provide transportation and at the same time evolve our response over time as the situation evolved. And we're continuing to do that with various safety measures. Replacement buses, we had 3 show up this past, I guess it's over the past 2 weeks. So these are the new Freightliners. CARES was a real shot in the arm for our vehicle replacement. So that's going to allow us to cycle out a lot of our older vehicles. Those 3 buses are now wrapped with our colors on the bus. And once we get some title work done, we'll be ready to put those on the road. There will be several more buses purchased through the CARES grant next year. Oh, it's getting hung up on me here. We also wanted to do some pedestrian and ADA improvements. Western at Carolina Forest, we've already talked about this several times before. This project is designed, we're going to bid it in January and hopefully have it constructed in the spring. This is a high transit ridership area, and it's also a high pedestrian area as well. So we want to put in the crosswalks and the sidewalk connections. Old Bridge Street, we've talked about this a number of times before too. These are the curb extensions to help improve safety at the courthouse. The survey work has been done. Our engineer is working on design, and we hope to bid that and construct it about the same time as what we just said with Carolina Forest. I think this will be a very welcome addition to that area. We also talked about a potential transfer station downtown. recognizing that we've got the park and ride, the improvements at Doctor's Drive and Jacksonville Station coming online, we wanted to invest some money downtown to help improve transit amenities, but at the same time also provide other amenities that would benefit the community as a whole. Some of the things that we might consider are restroom areas, shelters, public parking, things of that nature. But we have to go through a feasibility study process and site selection before we're able to program any money for design. So all of that work is underway, and we should be talking to you sometime, I would say mid-next year, about site selection, hopefully. Here's where we are with the funding. We've spent or encumbered about 1.1 million, which I would say is around 30% of the total amount, or a little bit less. O&M and buses, of course, encumber most of that cost, but then there's planning, design, and some others. The good thing about the other category here, we were able to make some improvements to the fleet maintenance building. They needed some additional air compressor capacity for that facility, so CARES actually paid for all of that work. Next step, so free fare ends in January. We do not plan to ask council for another extension to that. More buses on the way in 21. We definitely want to be under construction with Henderson, Western, and Old Bridge Street. Didn't talk about Henderson, and that's because our design is not mature enough yet. Once we have our engineer far enough along, then we're going to come back and talk to you about what we would like to do on Henderson. And I talked about the feasibility study and site selection, and of course, we're always going to come back with updates, particularly as we need to make decisions about contract award, et cetera. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Anthony? Thanks a lot for the presentation.
Thank you.
Transition, one thing I would like to remind the public is federal tax money comes from us. If the federal government is passing out the money, I think you can commend your staff for finding ways to spend the money. Because everything that we've talked about tonight that Anthony has shown you are things that this community needed, and you would have to vote as elected officials to find the local money. So while we're all in this together, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we are good stewards of the federal tax money and that we're making the benefits for this community. And I think you can agree from both of those presentations, a lot of good things are coming to Jacksonville because of the staff's work. I know that it has been a long evening, but I also know that the next topic is the one that you have waited with the most interest. And that is to talk about horses, livestock, poultry, and especially rabbits. Now, we purposely held this for the Thanksgiving season since we're dealing with livestock and poultry. We did think about doing this at Easter with rabbits, but the number of poultry and livestock outweighed the number of rabbits. So at this point, Ryan is going to talk to you about some challenges that we're having because of conflicts in the code between the city code and the UDO. Please.
Good evening once again, Mayor and Council, and we got Jason Larson, our Chief Code Enforcement Officer, with us as well, since it kind of impacts both of our areas. So as Dr. Woodruff just stated, the reason why we're before you tonight is that we have conflicts. Right now, the city code and the Unified Development Ordinance both deal with things such as poultry, livestock, horses, and rabbits, and they're not in sync with one another. So we're going to need to make a change. The biggest issue is that the city code allows poultry, the Unified Development Ordinance does not. So if our residents look at the Muni Code and they say, oh, look, we can have chickens, and that's the end of the story, they don't necessarily go looking in the Unified Development Ordinance. If they call planning and they look in the Unified Development Ordinance, it says, look, you cannot have chickens. So what we're here tonight is to kind of brief council and receive some guidance. And then we'll also draft the amendments, and we're talking city code and Unified Development Ordinance both. So we'll be before you in the future with those two amendments. And our recommendation is to create the additional standards, and we'll talk about those here in just a moment, for the Unified Development Ordinance. And these would be applicable to both the city limits and the ETJ. And then because situations like this can result in nuisances, the nuisance abatement would still remain in the city code as nuisances are currently listed, and that's applicable only to the city limits. So before I get on to the next item, which would be what standards does the city of Jacksonville want to look at, we reached out to the Onslow County Cooperative Extension, and they provided us the information. I believe Carmen distributed that to you. It's from North Carolina State University as it relates to keeping garden chickens in North Carolina. And I'm just going to read a couple of items that I think that is good background information. I've learned a little bit about chickens over the past few weeks, probably more so than what I wanted to know. But basically, on page 3 at the top, I'm going to read 3 different sections just to kind of outline a few items. A few hens in the backyard can supply all the eggs your family needs, along with the litter that can be used as a source of organic fertilizer. And the first thing that they say underneath do your homework first is you should always check within the city or the town to find out what the ordinances allow or don't allow. So we think that that's a great thing that the state's pointing out, is that you need to find out because different cities and towns have different rules and regulations. It also mentions that even modern ordinances allow garden hens, but usually prohibit roosters because of a noise situation. And then I'll get into some additional information on that here in just a moment. One other item at the very bottom there of page 3, if you're interested in this, is that they have to be cared for daily. So you go on vacation, you got to make sure somebody can tend to your chickens while you're on vacation. On page 4, it kind of talks about, well, you know, how many eggs does a normal hen kind of produce? And they average about 2 eggs for every 3 days. So about a, you know, day and a half, you get an egg out of the deal. And on page 6, as it relates to housing, it recommends, or it talks about the coop is composed of an enclosed dry shelter and a surrounding fence. And I think that when you hear us talking about some of these standards that they mention here, is because we want to make sure that if council decides to allow them, because that's really what it's going to come down to, does city council want to allow chickens within the city or not? If you choose to allow them, some standards to consider would be making sure that they are in a fenced area so that they don't become a nuisance to the neighbors, whether it be because they wander off into the neighbor's yard, on their boats, on the cars, et cetera. Then it goes on to making sure that the coop is predator-proof. Mainly make sure that it's a completely enclosed pen, but enough room for them to be able to run and live. In fact, they give you a square foot per chicken recommendation in this department, this ag book here that you have before you. And then it goes on the bottom of page 7 to talk about if the hens are allowed out of their own fence outside run, the ranging area should be fenced, especially if your yard is small and there's any chance the hens will wander off your property. Once again, it ties back into that nuisance concern that staff has. So with that being said, kind of the background that I gave council, what we would like to talk to you about and receive some direction is, you know, really, does the city council want to allow chickens? Because we got to make a change either to allow them in both ordinances or to prohibit them in both ordinances. So really the first question would be, you know, are we going to allow chickens? And if so, what's the maximum number? One of the other items where it talked about in here that for most residential settings, a small flock without a rooster is the best choice. For the safety of your hens, flocks of less than 10 should not have a rooster. So do we want to allow chickens? Do we want to prohibit roosters because of the noise? Ducks and geese, there's some other basically more nuisance as it relates to the manure, that type of thing, because it's just different than chickens, apparently. The other items that we talked about, well, we probably don't want to allow them in dense zoning districts, such as our downtown residential, or residential multifamily low density, residential multifamily high density, or the RS5. Mainly just the lots are too small to kind of really think about having backyard chickens. We would want to prohibit commercial activities. You know, if you've got, you know, a flock of chickens and you want to sell eggs, you know, running a business, you know, that's something that we want to be sure that we make sure that we prohibit that. And then what type of setbacks for the coop and the pen and associated fencing? Once again, if you have a fully feathered chicken, they can hop up on a 6-foot high fence. So even if we proposed a wooden fence, they still could fly out of the backyard and end up in somebody else's yard. So, you know, we would basically say, okay, well, we need to have the coops and pens set back so far from property lines, and it needs to be fully enclosed. And there may be others. Like I said, I've just kind of mentioned a few here that, for us to consider. And, you know, because of the conflicts, we would like to kind of move as quickly as possible so that we're ready to bring this back before the council at the beginning of the year. And unless Jason or Dr. Woodruff or Mr. Carter, Mr. Massey want to add anything, we're just really seeking direction so that we can amend the codes in the appropriate fashion. And I'll be happy to try to answer any questions chicken related.
Money for affordable coops?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure.
So, Ryan, you said the city code allowed them. So, okay, John?
I have the code in front of me, Mr. Thomas. The code was adopted in October of 1990, and this is what the code says. Rabbits and poultry for private use and enjoyment are permitted in the city limits as long as they do not become a nuisance because of noise or odor. That's what it says. Of course, when the UDO was adopted, in what year, Ryan?
2014.
14, there was not well, we need to make that consistent. So that's where the inconsistency began, and that's what we're trying to correct here tonight. But did I answer your question?
The people that had them before 14, were they grandfathered in, or they?
Well, we've talked about that very issue. But
I mean, I'm out there as much as anybody, I guess. And so I know there's chickens. I mean, I can't remember where it is, but there's a rooster in Northwood somewhere. I mean, I'll be working, I'll hear the guy. Are we facing a dilemma, or you just want to, I mean, do we have?
the dilemma is the conflict
Pardon
between
me?
codes. The dilemma is the conflict. If they call.
It's not people calling us complaining
Well,
about their
if they
neighbor's
look-
chickens.
If they look in the city code, they think that they're good and they've bought chickens, bought a coop, and they start raising chickens, and then it could be a problem. So anytime we recognize the inconsistency, now, both ordinances say whichever the strict rule is applied. So technically, since the Unified Development Ordinance is more strict, chickens are technically prohibited. But like you said, we know that there's multiple people throughout the city of Jacksonville that have chickens. And they enjoy their fresh eggs every day. So we just need.
Larson can, I think.
Yeah, if I may, Councilman Thomas, the last call that I received, surrounded a neighbor dispute. And the person in question had looked up our Muni code to see if chickens were allowed. And like Brian said, if you look at our Muni code, it says that they're allowed as long as they do not become a nuisance.
Right.
However, when you look in the Unified Development Ordinance, it's much more specific than Muni code. We do allow for chickens in the Muni code, but it doesn't say chickens. It's under the use table under livestock. So it's a different definition. So it's complicated to find if you're not familiar with the Unified Development Ordinance. And not only that, it's only allowed currently in the Unified Development Ordinance under RSF 20 and 40, which are much larger properties. So it's not so much a conflict. It's hard to compare the two because code just says you can have it as long as it doesn't become a nuisance. The UDO says you can have it, but only in these two zones. So that's just the main clarification, because if typically when somebody looks up city code, that's their first go-to is Muni code, and there's no specification in there, and that's what we want to clarify.
You get a lot of calls on this.
I know you probably researched some of our neighboring cities, or you've gleaned some information from them. Do they have a limit on the number of chickens?
They do.
They do. Are they somewhere around the number 10?
Yes.
More than 10 or less than 10? No, just kidding. Somewhere around 10, 10 or less.
Depends on poundage.
Roosters. But I know of another rooster. Randy hears the one. He's up early. He hears the one in Northwoods, but I hear the one out at the country club. So, or there's two actually out there. So,
I know I grew up with one in Belfort, and the chickens actually used to get out of my yard. But the rooster wasn't any noisier than the woodpecker that was up there.
We had a rooster that showed up at my house for about 4 years.
Is anybody
Don't know where it
complaining
came from.
about the chickens?
We have had some complaints. especially on the basis of them roving. Now, roving, meaning that, I will tell you, in the downtown area, there are some chickens, and they walk for several blocks and find their way back home at supper time. You know,
What you call free range, right?
yeah, it's truly a free-range chicken. But I think the real question is, do you want to prohibit them?
No.
Okay, then the next question is, if we're going to keep them, we believe there needs to be some standards. Because in the research that Ryan and CJ have done, what we find is that the communities that are more urbanizing communities, obviously we're an urbanizing community, they do create standards. And Ryan has gone through some of those standards for you. For example, how many can you have? Currently, you can have as many as you want to if you look at the city code. It doesn't say a limit, even though in the UDO, you're not supposed to have them. So one of the things that we would like to do is come up with a number. That way, you don't have a neighbor with 20 chickens out there saying, you know, so we need to come up with a reasonable number. The other thing that we want to make sure, though, is that none of this can be turned into commercial activity.
Right.
I will tell you, and this is not necessarily related to livestock, but if you have a pecan tree in your yard, as we do, there's no way that you can use personally all of the pecans that have fallen. My wife had the pleasure of picking up over 1,000 pecans off of our one tree over the last several afternoons. Fortunately, I've been at work, so I haven't been able to help her with that. The point I'm making is there's a certain reasonable number of eggs. If this is for family, there's a certain reasonable number of eggs. What Ryan has found through NC State is that those eggs are basically 2 eggs every 3 days. So there is logic to say somewhere around 4, 5, 6 chickens is a reasonable number, because most people don't have 8 members in the family. They have less. So the real thought here is, you've already said you don't want to prohibit them. So we're thinking about coming up with some standards. So yes, they can be allowed, but there's a maximum number. You can't sell the eggs. They have to be in an enclosed pen. Because I will tell you, one of our former people in city manager's office, you would know her name if I called her. She did not have pens, and the various animals in the neighborhood took care of her chickens. And that is not something we want. So if we're gonna have them, people need to be responsible for properly protecting them. So how is your feeling about a number? And how is your feeling about us coming up with some good standards that we present back to you? Now, the interesting thing would be this. Those standards would go into the UDO because it's a land use issue. There would also be changes to the city code because that needs to be changed, and the nuisance part would still stay in the city code. But the land use issue would go into UDO, the nuisance part would be in the city code. John, any clarifications? Ryan, CJ?
The other standard that I may mention was, would it be safe to say that since we're going to allow chickens, that we would expect the pens and coops to be behind the front wall of the building, so in the backyard, basically?
Out of sight. Covered.
And that's not to include roosters, ducks, geese, any other fowl. We're specifically speaking chickens.
This booklet recommended how many chickens for a family? Produce eggs?
It doesn't necessarily say how many, it just says the number of eggs, how often they produce. It says a few hens on the front page, and then it just says that flocks of less than 10 should not have to have a rooster. So I think that it goes, whether that number is 4, 5, 6, or 10, that there's no reason to have a rooster. And we're talking about prohibiting roosters anyhow. I guess, I think it's implied that if you have more than 10, maybe you need to have a rooster. But we're not recommending that we go over that number.
And we're also not suggesting that any city department adopt a rooster as a mascot. So let's keep it clear here. Are you comfortable with us coming up with some standards and bringing some things back to you?
Yes, definitely.
Just 5.
Yes.
The other thing I would, and this is not a pun, this is not intended to be cute. one of the things I'd ask you to do is look at the number of eggs that you consume as a family. Because that helps us, you know, obviously Gwen and I, interesting enough, we love eggs. We probably consume as much eggs as a family of 2 or 3. Ryan's gonna do the same thing. He has 2 children at home. So we're gonna ask y'all to do the same thing. Look at how many eggs you actually consume. And from that, it begins to give us at least a personal basis for saying, 4 chickens is enough. Oh no, 8 chickens is gonna be, so that would help us in our research.
Are we talking Christmas cookie time? I mean, I use more eggs when we're baking Christmas cookies, so.
All I will say is this, Christmas fudge does not include eggs.
Okay.
Well, I think Easter would be the big time for eggs.
Well,
Special
that's true.
exception based on the number of children. We're getting a little overboard on chicken.
Just bring us back something that would be.
Think a reasonable number.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Anything else for us?
Is that the direction you wanted or looking for?
We're not looking at, worrying about guinea hens or anything. We're talking chickens.
The code says poultry presently,
Yes.
That's,
whatever that definition is.
I guess that's a good point is, I mean, I'm not a poultry connoisseur, so I don't know the difference, but I know what one looks like. I know what a guinea looks like, but I don't know if they're more squawky or noisy than a chicken.
noisy and they like to roam.
So,
Duplin
Thanks.
County.
yeah. Thank you all for your direction.
Okay.
Well done.
To our reports section for the night, and I'm going to start with Councilmember Bittner. Mr. Jackson, Ms. Washington, Dr. Washington.
Yes, I do have a report, council, for tonight, and, excuse me. I've had an opportunity this week, to represent the city of Jacksonville with the National League of Cities Virtual Conference, and there's been a lot of discussion within the League of Cities with regards to city leaders, deciding how to move forward in such a volatile climate that we currently have in the United States. So I would like to share an idea, just a thought for the council to just think about, that if we ever find ourselves in a similar situation, we have a toolkit that we can turn to help us. So Kevin, can you please bring up the picture for me? I want everyone to take a look at this. The epitaph reads, "They moved closer and closer. Somebody started yelling. I tried to see a friendly face somewhere in the crowd, someone who maybe could help. I looked into the face of an old woman, and it seemed a kind face. But when I looked at her again, she spat on me." That's Elizabeth Eckford, Little Rock, Arkansas, September 1957. I'm going to reference this in just a few minutes. In the city of Jacksonville, in the Memorial Gardens, there are many military monuments that reminds the city of Jacksonville and Onslow County citizens, as well as our visitors, that freedom is not free. Freedom has a cost, and more often than not, freedom is paid with someone's life. One particular monument, the Beirut Memorial, greets the public with the epitaph, "They came in peace." As a public servant, I want to ensure the public I come in peace, and I stand with you alongside other elected officials to eliminate the rising tension and to close the polarization gap within the city of Jacksonville and Onslow County. After the results of the most recent election, Now may be the time for the formation of the City of Jacksonville Citizens Racial Equity Task Force. The purpose for this task force is to proactively promote racial harmony within the City of Jacksonville by mitigating racial conflict and disparities for its citizens. The inception of said task force will be in alignment with the most recent creation of the North Carolina League of Municipalities Racial Task Force. 3 years ago, I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I had the privilege of meeting Miss Elizabeth Eckford. At the age of 15, Miss Eckford, along with 8 classmates, were a group of African-American students that integrated Little Rock Central High School on September 4th, 1957. Because of the venomous epithets and a display of hatred by an angry community, President Dwight D. Eisenhower detailed federal troops to Little Rock to escort these students to school and from school, while tasked to protect the students during the school hours. For just a moment, I want you to remember when you were 15 and imagine the same scenario occurring at your high school. Imagine how your parents, local leaders, and community would or would not have prepared you for that pivotal moment in time. Would your allegiance and solidarity have supported the ideologies of an angry mob, or would you have stood on the pathway of least travel? I want you to imagine that at 15, you are now Elizabeth Eckford, facing an angry mob of individuals who seem to be innocent but threatened by you simply because the difference of skin color. I want you to imagine federal troops escorting you to and from school, accompanying you to your classes to keep you safe while you attempt to obtain a quality education. If you are able to empathize with Ms. Eckford and her classmates, then this example should give you pause. It also should give you pause to know that when advocates and allies of the Little Rock Nine and their families challenged the opposition, they too became victims of violence and found themselves wearing targets on their backs because they chose humanity and to serve mankind with compassion while defying the notion of inhumanity. Almost 9 years after the integration of the Little Rock Central High School, the Georgetown High School was destroyed in May of 1966, the night prior to the class of '66 graduation. The destruction of the school spared the life of thousands, but left the void of emptiness to unanswered questions and the inabilities of moving forward. The unresolved feelings of racial uncomfortableness remains prevalent and relevant and continues to overshadow this community, just as Little Rock, Arkansas, and the Little Rock Nine. As I begin my 10th year as a councilwoman for the city of Jacksonville, I simply do not want to be a friendly face somewhere in the crowd, someone who maybe could help, but rather a community leader who will help. As a native of Jacksonville and a graduate of Onslow County Schools, I stand in solidarity with advocates, allies, and other elected officials who will champion the cause to dismantle racial injustices in order to protect the vulnerable citizens, either children or adults, within our communities who cannot fight back against the evilness and volatile discord associated with institutional racism. The past, present, and future usage of microaggressions, those psychological threats, either overt or covert towards people of color, cannot be acceptable nor accommodating. Statistical data shows that race is the strongest prediction of one's success in this country from infancy to life expectancy. The challenge of this moment invites local government leaders to engage with their communities on racial equity and to move forward, making appropriate and effective policy decisions that can and will eliminate racial inequities in all government policies, procedures, and practices. The implementation of a Citizens Racial Task Force will help to provide our citizens, as well as our local elected officials, opportunities to strengthen our knowledge and our capacity to eliminate racial disparities, heal racial division, and to build an equitable community within the city of Jacksonville and Onslow County. Thank you.
Mr. Ward.
Proud to be here, Mr. Mayor. No report.
Mr. Thomas. That leaves me. I got a couple of things here I want to talk about. First off, I assume there's a video, some pictures that are supposed to go with this. In early November, staff discovered someone had vandalized 2 headstones and 1 marble bench at the Jacksonville City Cemetery. The headstones had been pushed off their bases so that they toppled over, and the seat part of the bench had been pushed off its legs. City police are investigating this crime. A few days after the incident, staff met on site with Mr. Randy Jarman at Atlas Monuments to get a quote on the cost for repairs. The next day, staff was informed that Mr. Jarman was at the cemetery completing the repairs at no cost to the city. In recognition of his selfless deed and for dedication to the cemetery and the community, I issued an Outstanding Citizen Award and pen to Mr. Jarman, as well as his assistant, Gunnery Sergeant Michael K. Williams, who also volunteered his time and effort for the families of those buried in the Jacksonville City Cemetery. It's very, very kind of him to do that. Veterans Day,
We need to applaud that, even though
yes,
he isn't.
absolutely. Yes. Randy's a good man for doing what he does in the community. The Veterans Day National Committee recognizes selected Veterans Day observances throughout the country that represent fitting tributes to America's heroes and that serve as models for their other communities to follow in their planning their own observances. The National Committee has designated the city of Jacksonville as an official regional site for Veterans Day observances for the 10th year in a row. Rolling Thunder submits the application for this honor each year. Mr. Alan Anderson, president, delivered the official recognition to the city. Our Rolling Thunder, or Chapter 5 here in Onslow County, does a great job of keeping, the veterans in mind, especially the MIA and those that were killed in action while serving this country. The next thing that I have is we've had several people that have started inquiring into the vacancy that may be given. And well, let me start off by saying, first off, even though he's not here tonight, congratulations to Mayor Pro Tem Lazar in being elected to the North Carolina Senate in seat 6.
Yes, sir.
I think he's going to do a great job for this region. But as I was saying, a lot of people have been inquiring about the position. So John, if you would indulge us and give us a little bit of information on.
Yes, sir. With Mr. Lazaro's election as a North Carolina senator, he will be taking the oath of office between now and the 1st of January. Prior to taking that oath of office, he will submit his resignation as a council member. Now, Mr. Lazaro is the mayor pro tem, but he actually represents Ward 3, so he's a ward representative. The legislature has given to the council the authority to fill that vacancy. That vacancy would have to be filled, number 1, from Ward 3. But number 2, that vacancy would be filled, if council elects to fill it, for that person to serve only until the next municipal election. And I think a few of you know when the next municipal election is coming up, and that is next year. So anyone who is appointed by council would have to file in July of 2021 and run for election in November of 2021 for the 2 years left on Mr. Lazara's unexpired term. So again, that, if a person were to be appointed after, again, Mr. Lazara first got to submit his resignation, but if the council appoints someone, it would have to be from Ward 3, and that person would only really serve until the new council, I'll call it, is sworn in December of 2021. Like y'all know, December, the first meeting in December is, after an election is when a person's sworn in. But again, that person could be the person you appoint, it could be someone else, but whoever's elected in that election would serve the 2-year unexpired term of Mr. Lazara. And then, of course, would be eligible to run for a full 4-year term, and I guess that would be 2023. Anyone have questions? Have I explained that?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
So if there's more than one individual, how will council appoint that individual?
Be totally up to council of how y'all want to go about doing that. It would be a council decision. You could say, we want to get summaries, letters of interest. You could say, well, I know Joe, and, you know, I really think he would be a good one to serve this period of time from whenever Mr. Lazara resigns up until through November of 2021. I mean, it's up to council to set any kind of interest or guidelines as to how you would fill it. It's council's decision.
Also, I think it's important, this is not a legal opinion, but John and I have talked about this. We also need to remember, we're nonpartisan.
Yeah.
So anything that you think of relative to the county commission and vacancies that they may have and the relationship between the Democratic or Republican Party, none of that applies to you. It's nonpartisan. And as John has said, the state statute says what it says. It gives you no guidance, though, as to how you go about filling that vacancy at all. So you have total options. You could do anything from this to nothing at all.
Just clarify one thing, John. I think I know what you mean, but if council were to appoint someone, that person is committed then to serving out 1 year of that term. But that person does not have to file for election if he or she was only interested in serving that 1 year.
Absolutely, yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes.
Want to make sure of that.
Anybody want to comment on that? My own ideas about it, but I mean, my thing is this, you got several people applying, okay? Somebody's gonna run for election to that term. They're gonna file in July. As an option, we can choose to do nothing and have the election be a level playing field for all those that desire to have that, to serve in that position. That's where I'm leaning, personally, you know, that I would much rather just wait and let the electoral process take care of itself, since we do have, you know, several people, you know, well, some have approached me, I know some have approached others on council. And I just think that's the right thing to do. And you may have a different opinion.
I'm inclined to agree with you, Mr. Mayor. I've been thinking about it. I know of at least, I think, 6 or so that have spoken to me. You know, if we're only talking potentially somewhere around 11 months if we appoint somebody the end of December or the 1st of January, whenever we might get around to doing something like that. You're only talking from January 1 basically to December 1, 11 months. I think we've got, you know, I think we've got what we need right here for the time being, and I would rather, like you, I think I would rather let the voters tell me who they want to to serve on the council rather than my decision as to who I would want. So I think, I mean, if we were talking different circumstances where we had longer time before it became necessary for an election, if for example, we could appoint somebody to fill out the remaining 3-year term, I would feel differently. But because this is just until the next election, which is this, the filing period is, as Mr. Carter has said, is this July, I think I would just as soon let that play out and not get involved in having to decide who I might favor or we as a council might favor.
Let me add one thing to that. Also, during that period of time that they would be appointed to that position, would be spent campaigning, you know, having to campaign for that position for the election in November. So, I mean.
Well, and there's something else that just popped in my mind too when you said that. If we were to appoint somebody who, for example, had no previous council experience, we all know how much time we spent in that first couple of months of going through, learning about the various departments, what all we had to learn, and of course we know that takes time away from staff. And that's, you know, maybe not a lot of time, but it's enough. There's a lot to learn about city council, and I've made the comment, you're really learning your first few months, you're drinking from a fire hose. It's more information than you can process. I don't know that we're really serving ourselves by, if we especially appoint somebody who has no previous council experience, you know, they're not going to be able to be of value, as much value as someone who's you know, had experience. So, you know, I don't want to just restrict our pool to those who've had previous council experience because of that requirement for all the training, all the knowledge, all the background information that somebody does not have. Yeah, they can bring a different perspective, but it needs to be a perspective based on knowledge of how council work, on knowledge of how the city works. So there's a lot of information that is not, you know, it's just not there unless you go through a training period. And I just hate to see us do that and then turn around and maybe that individual doesn't get elected come November and that process gets started all over again. So I think I would just assume, I think it makes more sense to wait and let the electoral process come out. My opinion.
Are we making this decision tonight?
Well, we're talking about it.
Well, we're talking, no, I don't think, unless we want to make a decision, but I don't know that we're necessarily
Okay.
talking about making a decision tonight. This discussion.
What about if we had someone who had previous experience on council, whether it's Jacksonville or other cities or communities? Do we deny them the opportunity if they live within Ward 3 to serve the public?
I don't see how we're denying anybody any opportunity, because the opportunity to run is certainly coming up very soon. I mean, again, my opinion is based on the fact that my leanings, I guess I should say, is because of the quick turnaround between when we would appoint and when somebody would have to file. Again, if it was longer, if we had the authority to go for the remaining 3-year terms of Mr. Lazar, I would feel completely different. But based on this less than a year, I just assume not waste staff time and not get involved in that training process, learning process, and really, you know, I think back to my first year. The first year I probably didn't speak much on the council, just because there's so much you don't know, as you're aware. You remember
We all
remember
at
our
some
first
point in
several
time.
months.
Sure.
There's a lot to learn and a lot to know, and wisdom is important, but knowledge is also important too.
I think too, if we were to make a decision tonight, at least it would make it, you know, in people's minds, knowing that's the direction the council was going to go in, and that would be definitive. I would encourage anybody that's interested in it, regardless of whether they're appointed or not, to file in July. Definitely. You know,
I would rather not make a decision tonight. I would rather the council members think about it and let us make a decision at the December meeting would be my preference. That way we can, if we need to, you know, have a one-on-one conversation or with somebody, or if you'd like to think about it some more, certainly I think would be appropriate to wait.
Getting a little worried in my old age, I'm starting to find myself in agreement with Mr. Warden.
Well, that is scary, yes, sir.
But I agree with you.
It does seem like
Let's decide at the
the,
next meeting.
the risk almost outweighs the benefits. You know, you risk alienated, you know, N-1 of the people that want to do it. And then, you know, like Bob mentioned, the potential benefit. I mean, the ward system obviously has its purpose and has a function, but I don't think Ward 3 has to worry about it too bad, since three of us up here are sitting here.
As you
know,
said
from
that, yes,
from
sir.
Ward 3.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of us are totally ward people. I mean, we're all about the city overall, even though
But
we're
we
not
do-
at large.
But we do have three eyes at least keeping a closer watch on
Right,
Ward 3.
Ward
That's
3,
correct.
so, you know, that's more pitfalls than
Benefits.
possible benefits to me.
I agree with you, Mr. Warden. We can sit back, we can
We
think
can
about
think
it.
about it, though.
Yeah. Like I say, he's still with us, by the way.
That's right, that's right. We're talking about you at the party, yeah.
Let's wait till after the funeral, right? But anyway, no, it's something we do need to think about as far as what course of action we're gonna take, if any, again, so. Just,
Manager.
all right, Mr. or Dr. Woodruff.
Mayor, you mentioned earlier about Veterans Day, and we have some slides in our One City moment. Veterans Day was a different experience this year than we probably ever have had in this community. But at the same time, you know that not too long ago, we adopted the Marine Bulldog as our mascot. And if you came in the Johnson Boulevard side of City Hall this evening, you noticed that our mascot is there now. And he has been joined by a Navy mascot. Mr. Jackson especially was appreciative of this. Jackson even has said that he's gonna come up with the appropriate name for the Navy mascot.
Okay.
So we're looking forward to that.
You can't name it after yourself now. Brian.
But I think anybody who comes to the city, we have placed them so that people can stand behind them and take pictures. And we're already finding a number of people have come when they have seen it at City Hall. They didn't come expecting to see it, and when they saw it, they have kneeled down next to one of the dogs and have had their family or a person with them take pictures.
And we have
So-
had some people buy these, haven't we?
I'm sorry?
Have we had some purchasers on this?
Yes, this is actually the Arts Council project. There are a number of businesses that have already bought these, and I'm sure you'll begin to see them around town. You see other communities with alligators or bears or whatever. You decided that we would have as our mascot the Marine Bulldog. And so we're real pleased to have these first two out, and you'll see a lot others at other businesses. Also on Veterans Day, we had a virtual Veterans Day support. You can see here, obviously, you recognize these two people. Since disabled American veterans could not have their annual observance at their home, they were invited to place a wreath at the Freedom Fountain to honor our veterans. Since the Freedom Fountain is dedicated to all those who passed through our community in service to our country, the DAV welcomed this opportunity. Also, we had the Walk of Honor. Our Heroes Mile has been on display many times this fall. It honors those who have lost their lives in service to this country since 9/11. Now we also have the Walk of Honor to honor those who served their nation at any time. Posters of these veterans are displayed throughout the memorial gardens. And what you'll find there are more than 130 city employees who are veterans. And when you consider the fact that we have, now that's, I was gonna, y'all beat me to it. If you were focusing very closely, you will see the very handsome colonel, and that is none other than our own Ron Massey. What you don't see in that picture, though, is the rest of the picture. If the full picture was there, you would find that Colonel Massey was presenting to his own son the congratulatory diploma from his graduation from West Point. Is that correct, Mr. Massey?
That's correct.
That's correct.
All right, congratulations.
Yes, that is a white uniform. Now, when I first saw it, I said to Ron, I didn't realize the Army ever wore white. And he said, we only wore it when we weren't in war, meaning actually at the battlefield, but for ceremonial white. So Ron, you want to comment any further on that great picture?
Oh, it was a great opportunity to be up there at West Point at that installation when my son graduated, and it was a real honor to be able to present him the diploma and be able to slip in there and do that. So,
When was this from?
that was in 1992.
And just for the record, Mr. Massey can still fit in that same uniform. He can. So, but again, as you know, we would encourage people, these pictures are still out there. When I was riding my bicycle this weekend and dismounted and walked through this area, I saw several city employees' pictures there. I would encourage all citizens to go to the Memorial Gardens and walk through and see this walk of honor. Lejeune Memorial Garden tours. As we did last year, the city offered tours of the gardens. We had several families that had come long distances, and they had the opportunity to tour the gardens. And you are to be commended for the work that you have done financially and otherwise to support the expansion of these gardens. They are truly a blessing, and they tell us who we are in our hearts and souls as the home of the Marines and Sailors here in Jacksonville. The other thing I would like to mention is, guess what? We're only a week away from Thanksgiving. Now, what that means from a sanitation collection standpoint is the following. City offices and services will be open Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So if your normal sanitation day is Monday, it stays. If your normal sanitation day is Tuesday, no change. But if your normal sanitation day is Thursday or Friday, please make sure that you do what I do, that you remind your wife, your spouse, your loved one, your children, to get the garbage cans out early Wednesday morning, because if you're on the Thursday or Friday route, you will be picked up on Wednesday. Okay. Now, I'll have trouble when I get home because of those comments, Mayor, but, you know, it comes with the territory. The other thing we'd like to talk a minute about is the fact we are very close to Christmas. Your next city council meeting will be at 5 o'clock here in this chamber on Tuesday, December the 8th. We're going to hold that meeting to a very few topics. And the reason why is because at 6:30 on Tuesday, December the 8th, we will have the Christmas tree lighting. Now, we're not going to do Winterfest in December this year. We have pushed it back to February, and hopefully by February, we will be able to actually have a celebration. But your Christmas tree lighting will occur on Tuesday evening, December the 8th at 6:30 in the same location at Riverwalk Park. That's on Tuesday evening. We're not encouraging the public to come out. We are encouraging the public, though, to watch it on TV. We'll have a very nice, brief ceremony, and that's why the city council meeting will be shortened. On Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at the park, at Riverwalk Park, we will have drive-through opportunities for citizens to come through the park. We will have city recreation and other personnel there who will be passing out various things that they would have gotten or received at the time of the normal Winterfest. So we encourage people to have a drive-through experience starting at 6 o'clock each of those nights, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the 8th, 9th, and 10th of December. Beyond that, it's a privilege to work with you. We thank you for your leadership, and those are my comments.
John? Mr. Carter?
No report.
So move.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.